Hey guys, tonight we begin with a whisper. Not the romantic kind, not the gossipy kind, but the dangerous kind. The kind that sounds like nothing, but means everything. The kind that travels through manor house corridors like smoke, invisible until it chokes you. This is about how servants learned to speak in voices so quiet they could barely hear themselves, how they turned whispers into weapons, and how the very architecture of English manor houses became a communication system for people planning murder.
Before we begin, let me ask something. If you're the kind of person who finds yourself thinking about the hidden lives of servants, about the power dynamics in old houses, about how ordinary people orchestrated extraordinary acts of violence, you're in exactly the right place. Take a moment to subscribe to Quiet Manor Story if that sounds like you, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what's drawing you to these darker corners of history. I'm genuinely fascinated by who joins me for these explorations of quiet rebellion. Now settle in, perhaps pour yourself something warm, and let's step into a world where whispers mapped murder and silence spoke louder than screams.
The manor is called Blackwood Hall, and in 1732 it belongs to Lord Edmund Blackwood, which is the kind of name that should come with a warning label. Edmund is 47 years old, enormously wealthy, and universally despised by every person who works for him. Not disliked, not merely unpopular, despised with the kind of cold, thorough hatred that takes years to cultivate and only grows stronger with time.
The servants at Blackwood Hall have reasons, so many reasons. Edmund beats them for mistakes real and imagined. He withholds wages for months at a time, claiming the household budget is stretched while buying himself a new carriage with gold fixtures. He exercises what he calls his rights over the housemaids, a euphemism so polite it makes the reality even more obscene. He fired the previous head gardener for stealing apples from the orchard trees the gardener himself had planted, then watched as the man's family starved through winter rather than offer any assistance.
Edmund is, in short, exactly the kind of lord who deserves what's coming to him. Not that deserving it makes it legal or morally uncomplicated, but it does make the story more satisfying in that dark, uncomfortable way that historical justice often works. The whispers start in the scullery, which is where most things start in a manor house, because the scullery is where the lowest servants work, and the lowest servants are the ones with the least to lose. Martha Finch is washing dishes when she says it, so quietly that Anne beside her almost doesn't hear. Someone should kill him.
Anne's hands go still in the washwater. She doesn't turn her head, doesn't acknowledge what she heard, just keeps scrubbing the same plate over and over. Around them, the kitchen continues its evening chaos. Cook is shouting about the ruined sauce. The kitchen maids are hauling water. The noise provides perfect cover for words that should never be spoken aloud.
I said, Martha whispers, even quieter now. Someone should kill him.
Don't, Anne breathes. Don't say it. Don't even think it.
Why not? Martha's voice is barely there, just a suggestion of sound beneath the kitchen noise. You think I'm the only one thinking it. You think it hasn't crossed your mind every time he walks past. Anne has thought about it. Of course she's thought about it. Every servant in Blackwood Hall has thought about it at some point. You can't live under Edmund's rule without occasionally fantasizing about his death in increasingly creative ways. But thinking it and saying it are different things. One is just survival. The other is treason against your employer, possibly treason against the social order itself. Definitely something that gets you hanged if you're caught.
Thinking isn't doing, Anne says finally, still not looking at Martha.
No, Martha agrees, but maybe it should be.
The conversation ends there.
They finish the dishes. They don't speak of it again that night. But something has been said that cannot be unsaid, and both of them know it. The idea has been planted, has been given voice, has been released into the air of Blackwood Hall, where it will find other ears, other minds, other people who have been thinking the same forbidden thoughts.
Whispers are like that. Once one person dares to voice what everyone is thinking, the dam breaks. Not immediately, not obviously, but slowly, carefully, in the corners and margins of the household, where servants move like ghosts, and their words disappear into stone walls.
The thing about manor houses is that they're designed for secrets. Not intentionally, though some architects certainly understood what they were creating. But the architecture itself, the layout of rooms and corridors and servant passages, creates a world within a world. The family lives upstairs in the grand rooms with the high ceilings and the expensive furniture. The servants live downstairs and in the back corridors and in the spaces between walls where they move invisibly, maintaining the fiction that the house runs itself.
Blackwood Hall is particularly well suited for secrets. It was built in 1680 by Edmund's grandfather, who was paranoid about Catholic conspirators and insisted on including hidden passages and priest holes, even though the family was staunchly Protestant. The result is a house riddled with architectural quirks, false walls, narrow corridors connecting rooms that shouldn't connect, spaces where sound carries in unexpected ways, where a conversation in the library can be heard in the servants' hall if you know where to stand.
The servants know. Of course they know. They've spent years learning every inch of this house, finding the warm spots and the cold ones, the places where floorboards creak and the places where you can move silently, the acoustic oddities that let you hear masters' conversations from 3 rooms away. This knowledge is currency. It's power. It's the one advantage servants have in a world designed to keep them powerless.
And now, slowly, quietly, they're using that knowledge to map something darker than eavesdropping.
Thomas Webb is the footman who first suggests they need a plan. He's been at Blackwood Hall for 6 years, ever since Edmund fired his father from the stables for being too old to work efficiently. Thomas watched his father die of poverty 2 winters later. He has not forgotten. He will never forget. When Martha's whispered suggestion reaches him through the servant network, he doesn't dismiss it as mad fantasy. He thinks about it carefully, methodically, the way he thinks about everything.
3 days after Martha's initial whisper, Thomas finds himself in the servants' hall after supper, surrounded by the people he trusts most in this household. Martha is there. Anne is there, despite her earlier reservations. James the footman, Sarah the housemaid, William from the stables, Cook, surprisingly, whose name is Mrs. Brennan, and who has her own catalogue of grievances against Edmund. They're not meeting officially. They're just sitting together like servants do, drinking weak tea and talking about nothing in particular. Except their nothing-in-particular conversation is happening in voices so quiet you'd have to press your ear against their lips to hear clearly.
If someone were to do something, Thomas says, not specifying what something might be, they'd need to know the house, know his routines, know when and where he's vulnerable.
Good thing we know all that, Martha murmurs.
Knowing isn't doing, Anne repeats her earlier words, but her voice is less certain now.
No, Thomas agrees, but knowing is planning, and planning is... He trails off, leaving the sentence unfinished, because finishing it would be admitting what they're actually discussing.
Sarah leans forward, her voice so soft it's almost not there at all.
The master takes his brandy in the library every night, 9 o'clock, always alone.
He sends us away because he doesn't like being watched while he drinks. The library has 2 doors, front entrance from the main hall, back entrance from the servant corridor. That back door, he never locks it, never even thinks about it.
This is information they all know, but speaking it aloud in this context, arranging the facts like puzzle pieces, that's different. That's starting to shape random knowledge into something useful, something dangerous.
The brandy comes from the cellar, Mrs. Brennan adds quietly. I supervise the household supplies, including what gets stored in the cellar, including what doesn't get noticed when it goes missing.
Poison. She's talking about poison without saying the word. Everyone at the table understands immediately. Anne's face has gone white. James is staring at his hands. William looks sick. But nobody stands up and leaves. Nobody says this has gone too far. They just sit there, breathing quietly, thinking about the shape of what's being suggested.
This is madness, Anne finally whispers. We'll all hang, every one of us.
We might hang anyway, Thomas says. The master's been talking about selling the estate, moving to London, taking some servants, not all. Most of us would be dismissed without references. Do you know what happens to servants without references? We starve, we become beggars or criminals, or we die quietly somewhere and nobody cares. At least this way we'd be doing something that matters.
Murder matters, Anne says. It matters when they string us up for it.
Only if they catch us, Martha says. Only if they can prove it. Only if there's evidence connecting any of us to what happened.
And how exactly do we ensure there's no evidence? Anne's voice is rising slightly, stress breaking through her whisper discipline. Mrs. Brennan makes a sharp gesture, and Anne immediately lowers her volume. How do we kill the master of the house without someone noticing we did it?
We don't kill him, Thomas says carefully. He dies. Tragic accident. Heart failure, perhaps. Or bad food. Or a dozen other things that happen to middle-aged men who drink too much and eat too rich. We just help nature along, and we make sure that when they investigate, every one of us has an alibi. Every one of us was somewhere visible, doing something ordinary, being the good servants we've always been.
The plan is taking shape now. Not a full plan, not yet, but the skeleton of one, the possibility of one. They're not just fantasizing anymore. They're actually discussing logistics, considering methods, mapping out how to commit murder in a house full of people without anyone noticing.
It should feel more dramatic than this, more momentous, but it doesn't. It feels like any other conversation about household management. They're problem-solving the same way they problem-solve everything else in their work lives, with careful planning and attention to detail, and the kind of collaboration that comes from years of working together.
That's what's most disturbing about it, really. How ordinary it feels. How easily they slip into plotting their employer's death, like it's just another task to accomplish, another challenge to overcome, another day at work.
We need to map the house, Sarah says suddenly. Not physically, in our heads. We need to know where everyone is every minute of every day. We need to understand the patterns, when the family moves through which rooms, when each servant is doing what task, when there are gaps, moments when something could happen and nobody would notice until it's too late.
We already know most of that, James points out.
We know our own routines, Sarah corrects, but we need to know everyone's. Every servant, every member of the family, every visitor. We need to map this house like a military campaign, and we need to do it without anyone realizing what we're doing.
She's right. They all know she's right. What they're planning requires absolute precision. One person in the wrong place at the wrong time, one unexpected witness, one servant who isn't part of the conspiracy seeing something they shouldn't, and the entire plan collapses.
They need to understand the house as a system, every person as a moving part, every moment as part of a larger pattern they can manipulate.
Whispers, Thomas says thoughtfully. We use whispers. We're already whispering now, talking where nobody can hear us. We continue that. We map the house through whispers, share information quietly, build our knowledge bit by bit. Anyone asks what we're gossiping about, we say exactly what they'd expect to hear, but underneath we're coordinating.
It's clever. It's the kind of clever that comes from years of being invisible, of being underestimated, of learning to hide entire conversations in plain sight. Servants gossip. Everyone knows servants gossip. It's expected, even encouraged as a harmless outlet for people with boring lives. Nobody pays attention to the specific content of servant gossip unless it directly affects them, which means the whispers can carry whatever information the servants want them to carry, and the masters will hear only meaningless noise.
We start tomorrow, Martha decides. We start paying attention to patterns. We start sharing what we notice. Quiet voices, careful words, nothing that sounds like planning, just observations about the household, just servants doing what servants do. They agree without voting, without formally committing, without any of the ceremony that should accompany deciding to commit murder. They just nod, finish their tea, and drift away separately to their beds. Tomorrow they'll wake up and perform their duties perfectly, like they always do. The only difference will be what they're noticing while they work. That's how conspiracies actually start, it turns out. Not with dramatic declarations or passionate speeches, but with quiet people in quiet rooms, making quiet decisions that will explode into violence later, with whispers that sound like nothing, but carry the weight of everything.
Anne lies awake that night in the servants' quarters, listening to the other housemaids breathe, and she thinks about what they're planning. She thinks about the moral weight of it, the practical risks, the question of whether this makes them heroes or villains, or something more complicated than either. She thinks about Edmund, about the things he's done, about the casual cruelty that defines his existence. She thinks about justice and revenge and the difference between them.
Mostly she thinks about whether she can live with herself if she participates in this, and whether she can live with herself if she doesn't, if she lets the opportunity pass, if she spends the rest of her life as Edmund's servant, knowing she could have ended it and chose safety instead.
She doesn't have an answer by the time she falls asleep, but she knows she'll wake up tomorrow and start paying attention to patterns, start contributing to the whispered map of Blackwood Hall, start becoming part of something that cannot be undone.
The whispers begin in earnest the next morning. Not obviously. You wouldn't notice unless you were listening for them. But they're there, threading through the household like veins through a body. Sarah whispers to Martha about the master's morning routine, how he takes breakfast alone in the dining room at precisely 8 o'clock and spends 20 minutes reading the newspaper before starting his day. Martha whispers to James about the afternoon schedule, how the family usually walks in the garden at 3 if weather permits, leaving the house quiet except for servants preparing the evening meal. James whispers to Thomas about security, about how the master keeps his study locked, but the key hangs in the housekeeper's room, where any trusted servant could access it. Each piece of information is innocent on its own. Together, they're building a map of vulnerability. Thomas is the one coordinating it all, though he's careful never to appear to be in charge. He's just another servant, asking casual questions, making idle observations, being friendly with his fellow workers. But he's the one cataloguing everything in his head, the one identifying patterns and gaps, the one who's slowly constructing a blueprint of how to kill Edmund Blackwood without getting caught. The first real discovery comes 3 days into their whispered surveillance,
William, the stable boy, mentions in passing that Edmund rides alone every Tuesday morning, always at 6, always the same route through the woods, always before anyone else in the household is awake. He goes alone because he likes the solitude, likes being away from his family and servants for an hour. It's the only time he's truly unaccompanied, truly vulnerable. This information gets whispered from William to Sarah, Sarah to Martha, Martha to Thomas. By evening, everyone in the conspiracy knows about the Tuesday morning rides. Nobody says explicitly what this means. They don't have to. A man alone in the woods on a horse is one accident away from death. A startled horse, a broken branch, a convenient fall. These things happen. Tragic, but not suspicious.
Except it's not that simple, and they all know it. Making it look like an accident requires more than hoping Edmund falls off his horse. It requires preparation, planning, the kind of staged scenario that takes time to set up, and even more time to execute properly. They'd need to weaken something, a saddle strap perhaps, or compromise the bridle. They'd need to ensure it happened at the right moment, in the right place, where Edmund's death would look inevitable rather than arranged.
More information is needed, more patterns identified, more whispered intelligence gathered. Mrs. Brennan contributes the dinner schedules, the meals Edmund prefers, the ingredients they use regularly. She's still thinking about poison, clearly, slowly introducing something toxic into his food over weeks, letting it look like natural decline. It's the classic servant's method, so classic it's almost predictable, which is both an advantage and a risk. Predictable means they know how to do it. Predictable also means investigators might look for it first. Anne discovers something useful while cleaning the library. There's a loose floorboard near the fireplace. She only notices because she steps on it wrong and nearly trips. When she investigates, she finds the board lifts up easily, revealing a space beneath. It's small, just a gap between the floor and the ceiling of the room below, but it's enough to hide something, or to access something. The library is directly above the servant corridor. The loose board is nearly positioned above the doorway to Edmund's study. If someone were in that space, they could hear everything said in the library, or, more intriguingly, they could see everything through the cracks in the floorboards. This information gets whispered immediately. Thomas is particularly interested. The loose floorboard creates possibilities. It means someone could monitor Edmund without being visible, could wait for the right moment, could act from above while having a perfect alibi below. The architecture itself is becoming an accomplice. The whispers continue. Day after day, servants moving through their routines while building a shared map of the house that exists only in their minds and their quiet words. They learn that Edmund's valet has Thursdays off. They learn that Lady Blackwood visits her sister on Mondays and returns late. They learn that the housekeeper, Mrs. Pemberton, who is not part of the conspiracy and must remain unaware, has predictable rounds through the house checking on the servants' work, creating windows of time when certain areas are completely unsupervised.
They are creating something remarkable, really. A collective intelligence network. Each servant contributes their specialized knowledge about their area of responsibility, and together they build a picture of Blackwood Hall that's more complete than any single person could achieve. They understand the house as a living system now, every movement tracked, every pattern noted, every anomaly significant.
It's the kind of organizational achievement that should be used for something productive. Instead, they're using it to plot murder.
2 weeks into the Whisper campaign, Thomas calls another quiet meeting in the servants' hall. Same people, same careful voices,
same awareness that what they're discussing could get them killed. But now they have information. Now they have possibilities. Now they can move from abstract planning to concrete action.
I think we do it in the library, Thomas says without preamble. Tuesday night, 9 o'clock. His brandy time. Mrs. Brennan, you prepare the brandy with whatever you think appropriate. Sarah, you'll serve it to him at precisely 9. Anne, you'll be in the servant corridor beneath the library, waiting. The rest of us will be visible elsewhere in the house, making sure everyone sees us and can testify we were nowhere near the library.
And then what? Anne whispers. He drinks poisoned brandy and dies instantly, because that's not how poison works. That's how people get caught.
Not poison that kills instantly, Mrs. Brennan clarifies. Poison that mimics natural causes. Heart failure, stroke, something that happens to men his age who drink too much and eat too rich. Small doses over several days, leading up to Tuesday, building up in his system. Then a final dose that night that tips him over. By the time anyone realizes to check for poison, his symptoms will look like natural death. And even if they do check, the poison I'm thinking of disperses quickly. It won't be there to find.
The casual expertise in her voice is chilling. Anne wonders where Mrs. Brennan learned this, then decides she doesn't want to know.
What about me? Anne asks. What am I doing in the corridor while Sarah is serving him?
Listening, Thomas says, through that spot where the acoustics carry, making sure he drinks it, making sure he's alone, making sure nothing unexpected happens. You're our eyes and ears. If something goes wrong, you whisper through the servant passages to whoever needs to know. We adjust in real time.
It's a good plan. Too good. The kind of plan that comes from people who have spent too much time thinking about this, who have war-gamed every possibility, who are serious about making this work. Anne realizes with a cold certainty that they're actually doing this. This isn't fantasy anymore. This isn't angry servants venting their frustration. This is a real conspiracy to commit real murder.
When? Martha asks.
Next Tuesday, Thomas says. 1 week from today. We need that time for Mrs. Brennan to prepare, for us to rehearse our movements, for everyone to establish their alibis. 1 week. Then Edmund Blackwood dies of natural causes, and we all continue our lives as if nothing happened.
And if we're caught, Anne has to ask.
We won't be, Thomas says with absolute confidence, because every detail is mapped, every person is accounted for, every whisper has been careful. We've planned this more thoroughly than Edmund has planned anything in his entire privileged life. He's going to die because he underestimated us, because he thought servants were too stupid and too scared to do anything but obey. He's wrong. The meeting ends. The conspirators separate. The whispers continue, but now they carry specific information, precise timings, the final details of a plot that moved from theoretical to imminent. Anne goes back to her bed in the servants' quarters and stares at the ceiling. She's in too deep now to back out. If she tries to warn Edmund, she'll be implicating herself and everyone else. If she does nothing, she's complicit in murder. There's no innocent choice available anymore. There's only forward into the darkness, or forward into the darkness while pretending it's light. She chooses forward, because at least forward means something changes. At least forward means Edmund's cruelty ends. At least forward means the whispers in Blackwood Hall might finally map something other than suffering. 1 week. 7 days until they find out if their whispered conspiracy becomes whispered success or whispered confession in a courtroom. The house feels different that week. Charged. Every corridor holds tension. Every whisper carries weight. The servants move through their duties with perfect precision, but underneath they're all watching each other, watching themselves, watching for the moment when their careful plan might unravel.
Edmund notices nothing. Of course he notices nothing. He's never noticed his servants except when they fail to meet his expectations. He certainly doesn't notice that the whispers in his house have changed from harmless gossip to coordinated intelligence gathering to active plotting. He just continues his routine, drinking his brandy, riding his horse, being cruel in casual ways that he doesn't think about, because to him they're not cruelty, just appropriate management of inferior people.
He has no idea that those inferior people have mapped every moment of his existence, that they're counting down to Tuesday night, that his death is being discussed in voices so quiet he couldn't hear them if he tried. The whispers in the hall are plotting murder, and Edmund Blackwood will never see it coming. Because lords don't listen to whispers. They think whispers are beneath their notice, just servant noise, background sound to their important lives. But whispers are how revolutions start, how injustices get corrected, how the powerless find power. And in Blackwood Hall in 1732, the whispers have found their target. Tuesday is coming. The map is complete. The conspiracy is ready. And Edmund has no idea that the quiet sounds in his house spell out his death.
When we left the conspirators at Blackwood Hall, they had 1 week until their carefully mapped plan would either succeed brilliantly or fail catastrophically. There's no middle ground in murder. You either get away with it or you hang. Those are your options. Anne is learning this lesson in real time as Tuesday approaches and the weight of what they're planning becomes impossible to ignore.
Monday morning arrives with rain. Heavy, relentless, the kind that seeps into stone and makes the manor feel like it's drowning. Anne is scrubbing floors in the main hall when she hears Edmund's voice from the library. He's arguing with his steward about rents. The tenant farmers are behind on payments because the harvest was poor, and Edmund is insisting they pay anyway or face eviction. His voice carries that particular upper-class drawl that makes cruelty sound reasonable, makes destroying families sound like sensible estate management.
Anne scrubs harder. 24 hours. In 24 hours, he'll be dead. She just has to hold on for 24 more hours without her guilt or fear showing on her face.
The problem is that Anne has always been terrible at hiding her emotions. It's why she works in the background, cleaning and hauling, never serving at table where the family might notice her. Martha is the one with the perfect servant face, the mask that never slips. Sarah can smile while being insulted to her face. Anne turns red when she's lying and pale when she's nervous, and right now she's both. Thomas notices during the afternoon servant meeting. It's supposed to be about household duties, led by Mrs. Pemberton, the housekeeper, who still doesn't know about the conspiracy. But Thomas pulls Anne aside afterward, his face concerned. "You can't look like that tomorrow," he whispers. "Whatever you're feeling, you need to hide it better. Mrs. Pemberton is already suspicious that something's wrong in the household. She's been watching everyone more carefully."
"I'm fine," Anne says, knowing she sounds nothing like fine. "You're panicking," Thomas corrects. "And that's normal. This is terrifying. But if you can't control it, you're a liability to yourself and to all of us."
The words are harsh, but not unkind. He's right, and they both know it. Anne needs to master herself by tomorrow night, or the entire plan collapses. She nods, swallows hard, and forces her face into something resembling calm. Thomas watches her critically, then nods approval.
Better. Practice that. Be that person tomorrow. The nervous you stays locked in your head when nobody can see her.
He walks away, leaving Anne standing in the corridor feeling sick, She's not cut out for this. She's not brave enough, or cold enough, or clever enough. She's just a housemaid who cleans floors and makes beds, and now, apparently, participates in murder conspiracies while looking suspiciously guilty about it. But she's also in too deep to quit, so she practices her calm face. She rehearses her breathing. She prepares to be someone she's not for one crucial evening. The final preparation meeting happens Monday night in the servants' hall. Everyone is there, whispering in voices so low they barely disturb the air. Mrs. Brennan explains the poison one more time. It's arsenic, though she doesn't call it that explicitly. Administered in small doses for the past week, each dose undetectable on its own, building up in Edmund's system, while presenting like indigestion or fatigue. Tomorrow's dose will be the final one, the amount that tips his damaged system into failure. He'll drink it at 9. He'll probably be dead by 10. It will look like his heart gave out, or his liver finally quit. Middle-aged men die all the time. Nobody will be surprised.
The brandy is prepared, Thomas confirms.
In the cellar, Mrs. Brennan says. The bottle marked with white wax at the neck. That's the one. Sarah knows to bring that specific bottle. Sarah nods. She's been practicing serving brandy all week, making sure her hands don't shake, making sure she can pour precisely while Edmund watches her with the uncomfortable attention he gives all the young housemaids. She'll serve him at exactly 9 o'clock. She'll leave immediately. She'll be downstairs in the kitchen by 9:05, where everyone will see her and remember her presence.
Anne, you're positioned in the corridor by 8:45, Thomas continues. You'll hear him enter the library through the servants' passage. You'll hear Sarah serve him. You'll hear him drink. If anything goes wrong, if he doesn't drink it, or if someone joins him unexpectedly, you whisper through the passages to the kitchen. Martha will be waiting there. She'll find a way to delay or adjust.
And the rest of us? James asks.
Visible, accounted for. Together in the servants' hall playing cards like we do every Tuesday night. Mrs. Pemberton will see us. Half the staff will see us. When Edmund dies, we're all together with witnesses. Nobody was near the library. Nobody had opportunity. It's a good plan. Actually, it's an excellent plan, which makes Anne more nervous, not less, because excellent plans can still go wrong in stupid ways. Someone could arrive unexpectedly. Edmund could choose tonight to break his routine. The poison could work too fast, or too slow, or too obviously. 1,000 things could go wrong, and there's no way to plan for every possibility.
What if it doesn't work? Anne asks. What if he survives?
He won't, Mrs. Brennan says with absolute certainty. Not with the dose he's getting tomorrow. His body is already weakened. This will finish it. But what if? Then we live with it. Thomas interrupts. We tried. We failed. We go back to being servants. That's the risk we all accepted when we started this.
Except Anne didn't accept it. Not really. She got swept along in the planning, caught up in the momentum, but she never actually decided that murder was something she could live with. She's been playing at conspiracy while hoping it wouldn't become real. And now it's Tuesday Eve, and tomorrow is very, very real. The meeting ends. Everyone disperses to their beds. Anne lies awake, listening to the other housemaids breathe and thinking about poison and guilt and whether there's any way out of this that doesn't end with someone dead or someone hanged. She doesn't find one. Tuesday begins normal. Too normal. Edmund takes his breakfast, reads his paper, shouts at a footman for some imagined slight. The household moves through its routine like every other day. The only difference is that everyone in the conspiracy is watching the clock, counting down hours,
feeling time compress as the moment approaches.
Anne cleans. She makes beds. She scrubs floors. She performs her duties with the same mechanical precision she always has, while inside her mind is screaming. She catches Martha watching her once, and Martha gives a small nod of approval. Her mask is holding. She looks calm. She looks like nothing unusual is happening.
If you just felt that spike of tension, like watching someone walk toward a cliff while pretending everything is fine, that's exactly why I make these videos. Subscribe to Quiet Manor Story if you want more of these moments where ordinary people navigate extraordinary darkness. Because history isn't really about the big dramatic moments. It's about the quiet Tuesday when everything changes.
The afternoon drags. Edmund rides his horse, returns muddy and irritated. Lady Blackwood takes tea in the drawing-room with her sister who's visiting. The children, 2 boys aged 8 and 10, are with their tutor. The household continues its countless small tasks that keep a manor functioning. Everything is normal. Everything is fine. Nothing about this Tuesday suggests it's different from any other Tuesday in the history of Blackwood Hall. Except the servants know. They catch each other's eyes across corridors and rooms. They're counting down together. They're all complicit now, even the ones not directly involved, because they've heard the whispers. They've noticed the planning. They've chosen not to report it. Silence is participation. By evening, the entire staff below stairs is part of the conspiracy whether they meant to be or not.
8 o'clock arrives. The family has dinner in the dining room. Edmund complains about the fish. Lady Blackwood is quiet, which means she's had another argument with her husband about something. The boys are exhausted from their studies and barely speak. It's a typical Blackwood family dinner, full of tension and silence, and mutual dislike, barely concealed by table manners. The servants watch from the periphery, clearing plates, pouring wine, invisible witnesses to the last meal Edmund will ever eat. Anne is not serving tonight. She made sure of that, made sure she'd be in the kitchen helping prepare the next day's bread, far from the family and their observations. But she can see Edmund through the dining room door, can see him chewing and swallowing and living his last hour without knowing it.
She feels sick. 8:45. Anne slips away from the kitchen, takes the servants' corridor to the passage beneath the library. The corridor is narrow, dark, the kind of space only servants use. She finds the spot Sarah marked for her, the place where sound from the library above carries down through the old stone and wood. She presses herself against the wall and waits. 8:50. Footsteps above. Edmund entering the library. She hears the door close, hears him settle into his chair with a sigh. The sounds are muffled but clear enough. She's relieved he's alone, that he hasn't varied his routine, that so far everything is going according to plan. 8:55. More footsteps. Lighter. Sarah. Anne hears the library door open again, hears Sarah's quiet greeting. "Your brandy, my lord." "About time," Edmund's voice, annoyed as always. "Leave it there, and the decanter. I'll pour my own refills." "Yes, my lord." Sarah's footsteps retreating, the door closing. Silence. Then the sound of liquid pouring. Edmund is drinking it. He's actually drinking the poisoned brandy. It's happening. After 2 weeks of planning and whispering and mapping the house and building their conspiracy in voices that barely existed, it's actually happening. Anne realizes she's holding her breath. She forces herself to breathe normally, quietly. She's supposed to stay here for the next 15 minutes, listening,
making sure nothing unexpected occurs, making sure Edmund dies alone, without anyone present to contradict the natural death narrative they're constructing.
9 o'clock. Edmund is drinking. She can hear the glass being set down, picked up, set down again. He's alive. He's still alive. The poison isn't instant. Mrs. Brennan said it would take time, that he'd feel unwell gradually, that the final collapse would come after the symptoms built up.
9:05. A cough. Then another. Edmund shifting in his chair uncomfortably. The sound of the glass being put down harder than before. A muttered curse. He's feeling it. The poison is working.
9:10. A crash, the glass hitting the floor, Edmund making a sound that might be pain or might be surprise. Anne presses closer to the wall, straining to hear. She should feel triumphant. They're succeeding. Edmund is dying. Justice is happening in the most direct form possible.
Instead, she feels absolutely terrified.
9:12. Heavy breathing. Edmund moving, stumbling maybe. A thud, like a body hitting furniture. Then another sound, worse. A gurgling wheeze. The sound of someone trying to breathe and failing.
Anne realizes with horror that she's going to hear Edmund die. She's going to stand in this corridor and listen to him suffocate or seize or whatever happens when arsenic shuts down your system. She's going to be a witness to the actual moment of death, the sound of it, the reality of what they've done. She wants to run. She wants to burst into the library and help him, even though helping him means exposing the conspiracy and hanging alongside everyone she cares about. She wants this to be over, one way or another, so she doesn't have to stand here frozen in the dark, listening to murder happen.
9:15. Silence. Complete silence from the library. No breathing, no movement. Either Edmund is dead or unconscious, or so still he can't be heard from the corridor.
Anne doesn't move. She's supposed to wait here until 9:30, making sure no one disturbs him, making sure the body has time to cool slightly before he's discovered. But standing here is torture. Every second feels like an hour. The silence from above is screaming at her.
9:20. Footsteps in the main hall above. Someone is moving through the house. Anne holds absolutely still, barely breathing. The footsteps pass the library, continue toward the stairs, probably Lady Blackwood retiring to her rooms. The footsteps fade. Silence returns. 9:25. Anne has never been more aware of her own heartbeat, her own breathing, the way her body refuses to stop being alive while Edmund's body has stopped. She's shaking. She realizes she's shaking and forces herself still. 5 more minutes. She just has to last 5.
9:30. Time to leave. Time to return to the kitchen as planned, to be seen, to establish that she was never near the library. But Anne's legs don't want to move. She's frozen against the wall, trapped by what she's just done, by what they've all just done.
She hears Martha's whisper from further down the corridor. "Anne, are you there?" Anne manages a whisper back. "Here."
Is it done? I think so. He's quiet. He's been quiet for 15 minutes. Then come, now. We need you visible.
Martha's voice is urgent, practical. Anne forces her legs to work, stumbles down the corridor towards Martha's voice. Martha grabs her arm when she emerges into the better-lit section, and Anne realizes how she must look. White-faced, shaking, absolutely not like someone who's been innocently working in the kitchen.
Pull yourself together, Martha hisses. Right now. You look guilty.
You look terrified. You need to look normal, or this all falls apart."
"I heard him die," Anne whispers. "I stood there and listened, and I couldn't do anything, and I heard him die."
"Good," Martha says brutally. "That's what we planned. Now act like nothing happened. Come to the kitchen. Be seen. You were helping with tomorrow's bread. You were nowhere near the library. That's your truth, and you need to believe it." She drags Anne back toward the kitchen, where the other servants are gathered, exactly as planned, playing cards, drinking weak tea, being visible and accounted for. Anne sits at the table, picks up cards with trembling hands, and tries to act normal while her entire world feels like it's spinning apart.
Thomas is watching her. So is Mrs. Brennan. They're evaluating whether she's going to hold together or break. Anne can see the calculation in their eyes. She's the weak link. She's the one most likely to crack under pressure. They're already thinking about what happens if she confesses, how to contain the damage, whether they should have trusted her at all.
Anne takes a deep breath, forces her hands steady, arranges her face into something approaching calm. She survived listening to Edmund die. She can survive this. She can be the person they need her to be for the next few hours, until Edmund's death is discovered and the initial panic passes, and they're all safely in the clear.
She can do this. She has to do this, because the alternative is hanging.
10 o'clock approaches. Edmund should be discovered soon. Lady Blackwood usually checks the library around 10 to remind Edmund to come to bed. Any minute now she'll open that door and find her husband dead in his chair, and the entire household will explode into chaos.
Except 10 o'clock passes, then 10:15, 10:30. Nobody has raised an alarm. Nobody has discovered the body. The library remains silent and undisturbed, and Edmund is just sitting there dead, while the household continues around him, completely unaware.
Anne realizes something is wrong. This isn't how it was supposed to go. Lady Blackwood should have found him by now. The delay is dangerous. The longer Edmund sits there dead, the colder his body gets, the more obvious the time of death becomes. They need him found while he's still recently dead, while the warmth of the brandy and the fire could explain the body temperature, while everything suggests he died just minutes ago, not an hour ago.
Thomas has noticed too. He stands casually, stretches, announces he's going to check the lamps in the main hall need trimming. It's a reasonable excuse to be upstairs. He's going to engineer the discovery himself if Lady Blackwood doesn't do it soon.
Thomas disappears up the stairs. 5 minutes pass. Then a shout. Thomas's voice, panicked and loud. "My lord! Someone help! Lord Blackwood!" The household erupts. Servants running. Lady Blackwood rushing from her rooms. Mrs. Pemberton marshalling the staff. Everyone converging on the library, where Thomas is standing in the doorway, looking appropriately horrified at what he's found. Edmund is in his chair, slumped forward, brandy glass on the floor beside him, very obviously dead. His face is grey. His eyes are open but unseeing. He looks like exactly what he is, a middle-aged man who drank too much and ate too rich, and whose body finally gave out. Lady Blackwood screams. The sound is genuine, visceral. Whatever she felt about her husband, finding him dead is still a shock. She collapses against Mrs. Pemberton, sobbing, and the housekeeper has to support her while giving orders to the servants. "Someone fetch the doctor. Someone inform the magistrate. Everyone else, stay calm. Lord Blackwood has had some kind of seizure. We'll need to—" "He's dead," Thomas says flatly. "I checked. He's gone, my lady." More crying from Lady Blackwood. The children appear, still in their night clothes,
understanding something terrible has happened, but not quite grasping what. The household descends into organized chaos, everyone moving with purpose, but nobody quite sure what that purpose is, except that their employer is dead, and everything is about to change.
Anne watches from the back of the crowd of servants, her face carefully neutral, and she feels nothing. Not triumph, not guilt, not relief, just nothing. A vast emptiness where emotion should be. She helped kill a man, and now he's dead, and she's still alive, and that's all there is.
The doctor arrives within the hour. He examines Edmund, asks about his health, his habits, his recent behavior. Did he seem ill? Did he complain of pain? Did anyone notice anything unusual?
The servants provide carefully truthful answers. Yes, he'd been tired lately. Yes, he'd complained of indigestion. Yes, he'd seemed more irritable than usual. But then Lord Blackwood was always irritable, so who could say if it was worse recently?
The doctor nods, makes notes, performs his examination. He finds exactly what he expects to find. A man in his 40s who drank heavily, ate poorly, lived with stress, and whose body finally quit. Heart failure, probably, or a stroke. These things happen. Tragic, but not surprising.
"My condolences, Lady Blackwood," the doctor says. "Your husband has passed. There will need to be an inquiry, of course, but I see nothing suspicious. Lord Blackwood's lifestyle was not conducive to longevity. This was sadly inevitable."
Lady Blackwood accepts this through her tears. The inquiry is scheduled for the next morning. The household settles into the strange liminal space of death, where routine has stopped but new routine hasn't started yet, where everyone is suspended in uncertainty.
Anne makes it back to her bed some time after midnight. The other housemaids are whispering about the death, speculating about what will happen to the estate, worrying about their positions. Anne pretends to sleep, listening to their gossip, hearing how the story is already being simplified into the acceptable narrative. Lord Blackwood worked himself to death. Lord Blackwood's heart gave out. Lord Blackwood is dead, God rest his soul. What will become of us all?
Nobody suspects murder. Why would they? Men like Edmund die all the time from natural causes. The real surprise would be if he'd lived to old age, given how he treated his body.
The conspiracy has worked. They've committed the perfect crime. Edmund is dead, and everyone, including the doctor, thinks it was natural. They're going to get away with it.
Anne should feel relieved. She should feel victorious. Instead, she just feels empty, hollow, like something inside her died alongside Edmund in that library, something she can't name, but knows she'll never get back.
She falls asleep thinking about whispers and murder and the price of justice, and she dreams of standing in dark corridors, listening to men die.
The inquiry happens the next morning in the manor's formal dining room. The magistrate, a man named Thornton, sits at the head of the table, looking grave and official. The household has been assembled, family upstairs, servants downstairs, everyone waiting to be questioned about Edmund's death.
Thornton starts with Lady Blackwood. When did she last see her husband alive? What was his mood, his health? Did she notice anything unusual about his behavior yesterday?
Lady Blackwood answers through tears. She saw him at dinner. He seemed normal, perhaps a bit tired, but nothing concerning. She retired early. She didn't check on him in the library, which she regrets now, but he liked his privacy during his evening brandy. If she'd known.
Thornton is sympathetic. He moves on to the children, but they have nothing useful to contribute. They barely saw their father yesterday. He was alive at dinner. That's all they know.
Then the servants.
One by one they're called to give testimony. What they saw, when they saw it, where they were during the crucial hours.
Sarah is first. She served Lord Blackwood his brandy at 9 o'clock exactly. She poured it from the decanter, placed it beside his chair, and left immediately. He was alive and well when she departed. She went directly to the kitchen, where she remained for the rest of the evening, visible to at least 6 other servants. Multiple people confirm her presence.
Thomas testifies that he was in the servants' hall playing cards until 10 o'clock, when he went upstairs to check the lamps and discovered Lord Blackwood's body. At least 8 people confirm he was in the servants' hall the entire time before that. He's visibly shaken by what he found, but his statement is clear and consistent.
Mrs. Brennan testifies about Lord Blackwood's meals yesterday. Nothing unusual. The same dishes he'd been eating all week. She personally oversaw the kitchen. Everything was properly prepared.
One by one, the servants tell their stories, all of them consistent, all of them corroborated, all of them painting a picture of a normal Tuesday where everyone was doing their normal duties and Lord Blackwood simply died of natural causes while they were elsewhere.
Then it's Anne's turn. She stands before Thornton, hands folded, face carefully neutral, and answers his questions. Where was she yesterday evening? In the kitchen and the servants' hall. Was she anywhere near the library? No, sir. She had no reason to be. Did she see or hear anything unusual? No, sir. Just a normal evening. When did she learn of Lord Blackwood's death? When Thomas raised the alarm and everyone ran to the library.
Thornton studies her. She can feel him evaluating her, looking for signs of deception. Anne keeps her face calm, her voice steady. She's not lying exactly. She was in the kitchen and the servants' hall. She was never in the library. She saw and heard nothing from any.
The fact that she was also in the servant corridor listening to Edmund die is simply a detail she's omitting. Omission isn't lying, it's selective truth-telling. That's what Anne tells herself anyway.
Thornton seems satisfied. He moves on to the next servant. Anne returns to her place in the line, feeling her legs shake with relief. She passed. She didn't break. Her mask held.
After all the testimonies, Thornton confers with the doctor. They speak quietly for several minutes while the household waits in tense silence. Finally, Thornton stands and addresses the room.
Based on the evidence, both testimonial and medical, I find no reason to suspect foul play in Lord Blackwood's death. The doctor's examination indicates heart failure consistent with Lord Blackwood's age and lifestyle. Multiple witnesses confirm that all household staff were accounted for during the time of death. This appears to be a tragic but natural event.
The household exhales. It's over. They're safe. The conspiracy worked perfectly, and nobody suspects anything.
Except someone does suspect. Anne sees it on Mrs. Pemberton's face as they file out of the dining room. The housekeeper is watching the servants with narrow eyes, her expression thoughtful and deeply troubled. She doesn't know specifically what happened, but she knows something isn't right. She's spent too many years managing this household not to notice when the servants are acting strangely, when their testimonies are almost too perfect, when everyone has alibis that are just a bit too convenient.
Mrs. Pemberton is suspicious, and suspicion, even without proof, is dangerous.
The funeral happens 3 days later. Edmund is buried in the family plot behind the church. Half the county attends, because that's what you do when a lord dies, even if he was a bastard. Lady Blackwood weeps appropriately. The children stand silent and solemn. The servants maintain their mourning faces.
Anne watches the coffin being lowered into the ground and thinks about what they've done. Edmund was cruel. He was probably evil in that casual, upper-class way where you don't even realize you're destroying lives because you've never thought of the lower classes as fully human. He deserved what happened to him.
But did they deserve to be the ones who made it happen? Did Anne deserve to become a murderer just because her employer was terrible? These are the questions that will haunt her for the rest of her life.
The estate passes to Edmund's eldest son, but he's only 10, so Lady Blackwood becomes the regent. And Lady Blackwood, it turns out, is nothing like her husband. She's kind where he was cruel. She's fair where he was petty. She raises wages, improves conditions, treats the servants like humans deserving of respect. The household blooms under her management. The whispers in the halls change from mapping conspiracies to sharing actual gossip again. Life at Blackwood Hall improves dramatically, and everyone silently agrees that Edmund's death was the best thing that could have happened to them all.
But the conspiracy isn't quite over, because Mrs. Pemberton hasn't forgotten her suspicions. She watches the servants. She notes who talks to whom. She's trying to figure out what happened, piece together the whispered plans she sensed but couldn't quite hear.
2 weeks after the funeral, she pulls Anne aside. "I know you were involved," she says quietly. "I don't know how and I don't know exactly who else, but I know something happened, something planned. I've managed this household for 20 years. I know when servants are hiding something."
Anne's heart stops. This is it. This is where everything unravels. "I don't know what you mean, Mrs. Pemberton."
"Don't lie to me, girl. I'm not going to the magistrate. Edmund was a cruel man, and I won't mourn him. But I need to know, for my own conscience, did you kill him?"
Anne looks at the housekeeper's face, sees not judgment, but something closer to understanding. Mrs. Pemberton knows what Edmund was. She knows what he did to the people under his power. She's asking not to punish, but to understand. "I didn't kill him," Anne says carefully. "I was never in the library. I never touched his brandy. I never laid a hand on him."
All technically true. Mrs. Pemberton studies her, then nods slowly. But you knew. You were part of it somehow.
Anne doesn't answer, doesn't confirm or deny, just meets the housekeeper's eyes steadily and waits. Mrs. Pemberton sighs. "I won't ask again. I won't investigate further. But Anne, understand this. What you and whoever else was involved did, that changes you. It changes who you are. You can't plot murder and participate in murder and remain unchanged. The whispers you were part of, they've marked you. That mark doesn't wash off."
She walks away, leaving Anne standing in the corridor feeling seen and known, and absolutely terrified that the truth is written on her face for anyone who looks closely enough. But Mrs. Pemberton keeps her word. She doesn't investigate, she doesn't report. She just watches and remembers and carries her own burden of knowing that her household contains murderers who got away with it. The whispers continue at Blackwood Hall, but they're different now. They carry a weight they didn't before. Every quiet conversation in corners feels dangerous. Every time servants gather to talk, Anne wonders if they're planning something else, or if she's just permanently paranoid after what they did. The conspiracy succeeded. Edmund is dead. Life improved. Justice, of a sort, was served. But the cost of that success is that Anne can never forget what whispers in the hall can accomplish when mapped carefully enough. She can never trust herself completely.
She can never look at the other conspirators without remembering that they're all bound together by murder and silence, and the terrible knowledge that they were capable of this.
That's what whispers map when they turn from gossip to murder. Not just the physical house and its routines, but the moral landscape of the people doing the whispering. They map who they are, who they're willing to become, how far they'll go for justice or revenge, or simply to stop suffering. The whispers at Blackwood Hall mapped a conspiracy against the Lord, and in doing so they changed habits forever. Changed the threats that moved through those halls from open cruelty to hidden danger. Changed the people involved into something they can never stop being.
Murderers who got away with it, living with that truth every single day.
The first year after Edmund's death passes like a dream, or maybe like a nightmare that you can't quite wake from. Anne continues her work at Blackwood Hall, scrubbing floors and making beds, and performing all the tasks she performed before, except now she does them while carrying the knowledge that she helped plan a murder and got away with it. That weight changes everything, changes how she sees herself, how she moves through the world, how she breathes.
Lady Blackwood, true to her nature, transforms the household. Wages increase. The brutal punishments stop. Servants are treated with basic human dignity, which feels revolutionary after years of Edmund's cruelty. The house itself seems lighter somehow, like it's relieved to be free of its master's darkness. Martha thrives. Sarah becomes head housemaid. Thomas is promoted to butler when the old one retires. Mrs. Brennan continues running the kitchen with her quiet efficiency, never once acknowledging what she put in that final brandy bottle. They are all being rewarded for murder. Not directly, not explicitly, but the improvement in their lives is directly connected to Edmund's death. They killed their way into better working conditions, and none of them quite know what to do with that moral calculus. Anne is the only one who seems unable to adjust. She expected guilt, and she has that in abundance. But she also expected it to fade, expected time to make it easier to live with what they did. Instead, the guilt grows. It metastasizes. It becomes the lens through which she sees everything. 6 months after the death, Thomas pulls her aside after a servant meeting. "You need to stop," he says quietly. "Stop what?" "Whatever you're doing, this guilt spiral, you look haunted. People are starting to notice. Mrs. Pemberton has been watching you even more carefully than usual. If you keep acting like you have something to hide, eventually someone will figure out what it is." "I do have something to hide," Anne says. "We all do. And we're all hiding it successfully, except you. You're the weak link again, Anne. You were the weak link during the planning, you were the weak link during the execution, and now you're the weak link in the aftermath. At some point, you become too much of a risk." The threat is gentle but unmistakable. Thomas is suggesting that if Anne can't control herself, steps will need to be taken to protect the others, to protect the conspiracy. Anne isn't sure what those steps would entail, but she knows they wouldn't be pleasant. She tries harder after that, tries to bury the guilt deeper, to perform normalcy more convincingly. But trying to not feel guilty just makes her more aware of the guilt, which makes her behavior more forced, which makes her seem more suspicious. It's a terrible feedback loop. 1 year after Edmund's death, everything unravels. Not dramatically, not in the way you'd expect, but quietly, inevitably, the way whispers always work. It starts with William, the stable boy, who was part of the original conspiracy. He's never been quite right since the death. He drinks more than he should. He startles easily.
He has nightmares that wake the other stable hands. And one night, drunk and terrified, and unable to carry the weight any more, he confesses to Father Benedict during confession at the village church.
He tells the priest everything about the planning, the whispers, the mapping of the house, the poisoned brandy. He names names. Thomas, Martha, Sarah, Mrs. Brennan. He names Anne. He describes exactly how they orchestrated Edmund's death and made it look natural. He confesses it all, seeking absolution for a sin that won't let him sleep.
Father Benedict is old and has heard many confessions over his decades as a priest. But this one is different. This is murder. Premeditated, carefully planned, successfully executed murder. The seal of confession prevents him from reporting it directly to the authorities, but it doesn't prevent him from acting on the information in other ways.
He calls Lady Blackwood to the rectory for a private meeting. He doesn't tell her about William's confession directly, but he suggests, carefully, that there may have been irregularities around her husband's death, that she might want to have the body examined, that certain servants might have had motive and opportunity. He plants seeds of doubt without breaking the confessional seal, and then he waits to see what grows.
Lady Blackwood is not stupid. She knows her husband was hated. She knows what he did to the servants. She's suspected for a year now that his death was too convenient, too perfectly timed to save everyone from his cruelty. But she's chosen not to investigate, because life improved so dramatically after he died. Why disturb that improvement by digging up ugly truths?
Except now, Father Benedict is suggesting those truths might surface anyway, and if they do, Lady Blackwood needs to decide what side of them she wants to be on.
She takes a week to think about it, a week to weigh justice against mercy, revenge against pragmatism, the legal requirement to report murder against the human understanding that sometimes murder is the least evil option in a situation with no good choices.
Then she calls Mrs. Pemberton to her private study and asks her directly, "Did the servants kill my husband?"
Mrs. Pemberton has been waiting for this question for a year. She takes a breath and makes her own choice. "I believe so, my lady. I don't have proof, but I believe it happened."
Who?
I don't know all of them, but Anne, the housemaid, was definitely involved. She's been carrying it like a weight ever since. The others hide it better.
Lady Blackwood looks out her window at the garden where her children are playing, Edmund's sons, who barely remember their father, who have grown happier and healthier in his absence. She thinks about the servants who committed murder, but who also make her household run smoothly, who work hard, who treat her children with kindness Edmund never showed them.
"I need to know the truth," she finally says. "All of it. Question the servants, carefully. Don't accuse directly, just probe for information. Report back to me with what you find. Then I'll decide what to do." Mrs. Pemberton nods. She's been given permission to investigate, which means the conspiracy's days are numbered. You can't interrogate servants about murder without someone breaking. Someone always breaks.
She starts with Anne, because Anne is already crumbling. Mrs. Pemberton brings her to the housekeeper's office, closes the door and sits her down. "Tell me the truth about Lord Blackwood's death. Not what you testified at the inquiry. The truth."
Anne's face crumbles immediately. She's been holding this inside for a year, carrying it alone, dying under the weight. And now someone is asking for the truth directly, giving her permission to unburden herself, offering the possibility of confession, even if it means hanging. "I can't,"
Anne whispers. "I'll hang. We'll all hang."
Possibly, Mrs. Pemberton agrees. Or possibly Lady Blackwood will choose mercy. She's not her husband. She might understand. But you need to tell me what happened. All of it. Anne looks at the housekeeper's face, sees not anger, but something closer to pity. Mrs. Pemberton knows already. She's known for a year. She's just asking Anne to confirm it, to give voice to the whispers that have been haunting Blackwood Hall since Edmund died.
"It was poison," Anne says quietly. "In the brandy. Mrs. Brennan prepared it. Sarah served it. I listened from the corridor to make sure he drank it. Thomas coordinated everything. Martha helped plan it. We all did it. We killed him because he was cruel, and we couldn't live under his rule anymore."
The words tumble out, confessions spilling like water from a cracked dam. She tells Mrs. Pemberton everything. The whispered planning, the mapping of the house, the careful coordination, the night Edmund died while she listened from below. All of it. The whole ugly, necessary truth.
When she finishes, Mrs. Pemberton just nods. "Thank you for your honesty. Stay here. I need to report this to Lady Blackwood."
Anne sits alone in the housekeeper's office and waits for her life to end. This is it. The conspiracy is exposed. They are all going to hang. She should feel relieved that it's over, that the guilt can finally be resolved in punishment. Instead, she just feels tired. So very tired.
An hour later, Mrs. Pemberton returns. "Lady Blackwood wants to see you. Come with me." Anne follows on, shaking legs, to Lady Blackwood's study. The lady of the house is seated behind her desk, her face unreadable. Anne curtsies awkwardly and waits for judgment. "Mrs. Pemberton tells me you've confessed to murdering my husband," Lady Blackwood says. Her voice is controlled, neutral. Anne can't tell what she's thinking.
"Yes, my lady, along with several others. I'm sorry. We're all sorry."
Are you sorry that he's dead, or sorry that you're caught?
Anne considers lying, then realizes there's no point anymore. Sorry we had to do it. Not sorry he's dead. He was cruel, my lady. He was... She trails off, unable to find words that adequately describe Edmund's evil without insulting the man Lady Blackwood married. "I know what he was," Lady Blackwood says quietly. "I lived with him for 15 years. I bore his children. I endured his everything. I know exactly what he was."
Then you understand why...
I understand you felt you had no other option. I understand he created the conditions that led to his own death. I understand that in your position I might have done the same. She pauses, choosing her words carefully. But understanding doesn't change the law. You committed murder. The others committed murder. That's a hanging offence, regardless of motivation.
Anne nods. She knew this was coming. At least it will finally be over.
However, Lady Blackwood continues, I have some discretion in how this proceeds. I can report you to the authorities. The full investigation will happen. Everyone involved will be identified and arrested, and you'll all hang. That's one option.
What's the other option? The other option is that I don't report it. Lord Blackwood's death remains what the inquiry said it was, natural causes. Nobody investigates further. Nobody hangs. But you leave. Today. Immediately. You pack your things, you take 1 month's wages as severance, and you disappear. Forever.
You never come back to this county, you never contact anyone from this household again. You cease to exist as far as Blackwood Hall is concerned.
Anne stares at her. This is mercy, real, tangible mercy, from someone who has every right and reason to demand justice. And the others?
I'm offering the same deal to everyone Mrs. Pemberton identifies as being involved. Leave quietly or face trial publicly. Those are the options. Most of you will take the first one, I expect. A few might choose justice over exile, but I doubt it. Survival is a powerful motivator.
Why? Anne asks. Why offer mercy at all? We killed your husband.
Lady Blackwood's expression shifts, becoming something harder and sadder. Because my husband created this situation. Because he treated you all like property instead of people. Because I watched him brutalize this household for years and I did nothing to stop it. I'm complicit in what drove you to murder. And because... She stops, swallows. Because I'm glad he's dead. There. I've said it. I'm glad. My children are safer without him. I'm safer without him. This entire estate is better without him. You gave me freedom when you gave him poison. How can I punish you for that?
The admission hangs in the air between them. Two women connected by violence, by survival, by the complicated morality of sometimes the worst thing is also the necessary thing. Thank you for spending this time with me following the whispers at Blackwood Hall to their conclusion. If this story changed how you think about justice, about power, about the impossible choices people face in unjust situations, I'd be grateful if you'd subscribe to Quiet Manor Story and share your thoughts. What surprised you most about how this unfolded? What would you have done in Anne's position or Lady Blackwood's? What does this story reveal about the quiet ways that ordinary people resist cruelty? I read every single comment, and I'm genuinely curious about your perspective on these questions of guilt, justice, and survival. Anne leaves Blackwood Hall that afternoon. She packs her few possessions, accepts the wages Lady Blackwood provides, and walks away from the only home she's known in her adult life. She doesn't say goodbye to Martha or Thomas or any of the others. She doesn't leave a note. She simply disappears as instructed, becomes a ghost, becomes nothing to the place she once murdered for. She travels north, finds work at a smaller household where nobody knows her history. She invents a past that's close enough to true, but omits the murder. She becomes someone new, someone who's never done anything worse than break a dish or arrive late to work. But she carries Blackwood Hall with her always, in the nightmares that wake her gasping, in the way she flinches at raised voices, in the careful mask she wears that never quite slips but never quite feels natural either. She lives 40 more years after leaving Blackwood Hall, and every single one of those years is haunted by the whispers she participated in, the conspiracy she helped execute, the night she stood in a corridor and listened to Edmund die. The others take Lady Blackwood's offer too. Thomas leaves for London. Martha goes to her sisters in Yorkshire. Sarah finds a position in a household 3 counties away. Mrs. Brennan retires to a cottage on the coast, claiming she's too old to work anymore. One by one, the conspirators scatter, taking their guilt with them, leaving Blackwood Hall free of the people who killed its master. William, the stable boy who confessed, is the only one who refuses the exile. He insists he needs to face proper justice, needs to be punished for what he did. Lady Blackwood tries to dissuade him, but he's adamant, so she reports him to the authorities. Only him. She frames it as a single disturbed servant who poisoned Lord Blackwood in a fit of madness. She provides evidence of William's drinking, his instability, his personal grudge against Edmund for firing his father.
William is tried, convicted, and hanged. He goes to his death claiming there were others involved, naming names, insisting it was a conspiracy, not a lone act. But nobody believes him. Why would they? Lady Blackwood testifies that William is mentally unstable. The inquiry already determined Edmund's death was natural. William's confession sounds like the ravings of a guilty conscience, creating elaborate fantasies to explain his inexplicable crime. He hangs alone for a murder committed by 6 people. The others live free, scattered across England, carrying their secret until they die. It's not fair, it's not just, but it is what happens. That's the nature of conspiracy. Some people pay the price, while others walk away.
Lady Blackwood runs Blackwood Hall for another 20 years, until her eldest son comes of age and takes over. She's a good mistress, fair and kind, everything Edmund wasn't. Under her management, the estate prospers, the servants are happy, the whispers in the halls return to normal gossip about nothing in particular. But the old servants, the ones who were there during Edmund's time, they remember. They tell stories to the new hires about the conspiracy that happened once, about the whispers that mapped murder. They make it sound like legend, like something that maybe happened or maybe didn't, like the kind of stories servants tell to entertain each other during long evenings. But it's not legend. It's history, hidden history, the kind that doesn't make it into official records because the people involved were too low class for their actions to be documented. But it happened. In that house, in 1732, servants whispered their way into murder and got away with it. They mapped a conspiracy in voices so quiet most people never heard them, and they executed it perfectly. The habits changed after that, not just at Blackwood Hall, but throughout England as the story spread through the servant network. Masters started paying closer attention to their staff's whispers, started wondering what was being planned in those quiet conversations they could barely hear. Servants learned to whisper even more quietly, or to not whisper at all, saving their dangerous thoughts for absolute privacy. The architecture of manor houses stopped being such a tool for servants. Masters started closing off the servant passages, blocking the acoustic oddities, making sure that whispers couldn't carry from room to room. They started treating the physical structure of their houses as potential threats, places where invisible people could organize invisible rebellion. And the threats themselves changed. Masters who would have been casually cruel like Edmund learned to moderate their behavior, not out of kindness usually, but out of self-preservation, because Blackwood Hall proved that servants weren't helpless, that they could organize, could plan, could kill if pushed far enough, that whispers could become weapons if you weren't careful. The story of what happened, the real story, not the legend, spread through England's servant class like wildfire. Every housemaid and footman heard some version of it. The details varied. Sometimes it was poison in the brandy, sometimes it was a staged accident, sometimes it was something more dramatic. But the core message was always the same. Servants have power if they choose to use it, even against someone as privileged and protected as a lord. That message changed the dynamic in households throughout the country. It made servants braver and masters more cautious. It proved that the invisible people running England's great houses weren't as powerless as everyone assumed, that they could coordinate, could keep secrets, could execute plans that the educated upper classes never saw coming. Anne dies at 63, in a small cottage in the north, surrounded by the family she worked for, who never knew her real history. On her deathbed, she thinks about Blackwood Hall.
about the whispers that changed everything, about the conspiracy that worked perfectly except for the cost it extracted from everyone involved. She wonders sometimes what would have happened if they'd chosen differently, if they'd endured Edmund's cruelty instead of ending it, if they'd found some other way to resist that didn't involve murder. She'll never know. The choice was made. The whispers became action. Edmund died, and they all lived with it differently.
Anne's last thought before she dies is about that night in the corridor. Standing in the dark, listening to Edmund struggle and fail and stop. That moment when she realized murder was real, not theoretical. When she understood that taking a life, even a cruel life, changes something fundamental in the person doing the taking.
She dies carrying that weight. So do all the others, in their own ways, in their own times. The conspiracy binds them together across decades and distance. They never see each other again after leaving Blackwood Hall, but they're connected forever by the whispers they shared, the murder they committed, the secret they carried.
That's what Whispers in the Hall mapped that year. Not just Edmund's death, but the moral landscape of everyone involved. They discovered who they were willing to become when pushed far enough. They learned that resistance is possible, even from positions of complete powerlessness. They proved that whispers, mapped carefully enough, can kill.
The story becomes cautionary, eventually. Parents warn children about the Blackwood Hall murders, the legend version, sanitized and simplified. Don't plot against your employers. Don't whisper conspiracies. Don't think that being invisible makes you untouchable. The law will find you eventually, they say. Which is interesting, because the law never did find most of the conspirators. They died free and unpunished, carrying their guilt, but never their conviction.
But the deeper lesson is the one that never gets stated explicitly. The one that makes this story dangerous to tell, even in legend form, which is that sometimes murder works. Sometimes killing the person making your life hell is the only solution that actually solves the problem. Sometimes justice comes not through legal channels, but through arsenic and careful planning, and whispers that map vulnerability.
That's a terrible lesson. It's the kind of lesson that undermines the entire social order. It suggests that the lower classes aren't obligated to suffer forever, that they can take direct action, that the powerful aren't actually protected by anything except the reluctance of the powerless to use violence. England's ruling class understood this danger. They understood that Blackwood Hall represented something much bigger than one murder in one household. It represented the possibility that servants everywhere might decide to organize, to whisper, to map their own conspiracies.
So they buried the story. Not literally, you can't bury something that happened in front of so many witnesses, but they downplayed it. They turned it into legend, into ghost story, into something that probably didn't happen quite that way. They made sure that William's hanging was the official ending.
But the servants knew better. They always know better. They kept the real story alive in their whispered conversations, their careful warnings, their passed-down knowledge about what happened when 6 servants decided they'd had enough of Edmund Blackwood and did something about it.
The real story, the one we've been following, is about what happens when ordinary people are pushed past their breaking point. It's about how architecture and routine can be weaponized by people who are invisible by design. It's about moral compromise and collective guilt, and the question of whether justice achieved through murder is still justice or something else entirely. Most importantly,
It's about whispers, about how the quietest voices can become the most dangerous when they organize, when they agree, when they map their world carefully enough to find the vulnerable spots.
The whispers in Blackwood Hall's corridors didn't just gossip or share news. They built a murder plot piece by careful piece. They mapped not just the house's physical layout, but its temporal rhythms, its human patterns, its moments of vulnerability. They turned invisible labor into invisible coordination, and then into very visible death. That's what changed the habits of England's great houses. The realization that the whispers were paying attention, that the servants saw everything, knew everything, and might use that knowledge for purposes beyond their master's comfort. The quiet threats weren't hypothetical anymore. They'd proven themselves deadly.
Edmund Blackwood died because he underestimated whispers, because he thought servants gossiping in corners was harmless, beneath his notice, just background noise. He never imagined those whispers were mapping his routine, identifying his vulnerabilities, coordinating his murder. By the time anyone realized what the whispers meant, he was dead.
The lesson spread. Masters throughout England learned to pay attention to their servants' whispers, to wonder what was being discussed in those quiet conversations, to understand that invisibility cuts both ways. If servants are invisible to masters, then servants can act without being seen, can plan without being suspected, can kill without being caught.
That's the real legacy of Blackwood Hall. Not the specific murder, but what it proved was possible. What it taught to both servants and masters about power and vulnerability, and the dangerous potential of people who have nothing left to lose.
The manor still stands, actually. Blackwood Hall survived its infamous year and continued as a grand house for 2 more centuries. It's been renovated, modernized, stripped of most of its original architectural oddities. The servant passages are sealed off, the acoustic anomalies have been eliminated by updated construction. The house has been secured against the possibility that whispers might map it again.
But visitors claim to hear things, quiet voices in empty corridors, whispered conversations with no visible speakers, the sound of people moving through passages that don't exist anymore. The usual ghost story nonsense that accumulates around any old building with a dark history.
The truth is probably more mundane. Old houses creak. Wind through cracks makes sounds. People's imagination supplies the rest. There are no ghosts at Blackwood Hall, just history, buried under layers of time and renovation, and the deliberate forgetting that happens when a story becomes too dangerous to remember accurately.
But the story persists anyway, gets told and retold, changed and embellished, turned into something more dramatic than it was, or something less threatening than it was, depending on who's doing the telling. The whispers about the whispers continue, carrying forward the knowledge of what happened here, even if the details blur over time.
Anne's story, Thomas's story, Martha's story, all of them get absorbed into the larger narrative of class conflict and servant resistance. They become examples, cautionary tales, inspiration for other oppressed people wondering if direct action is justified. The specific humans with their specific guilt and fear and choices fade into archetypes.
That's how history works for people like them. The individuals disappear, but the pattern remains. The whispers that mapped Edmund's death continue echoing through time, teaching new generations about power and resistance, and the potential of organized invisibility.
And maybe that's enough. Maybe becoming a pattern is its own kind of immortality, more lasting than any individual life. The conspirators at Blackwood Hall are all dead now, have been dead for centuries. But what they did, what they proved possible, that lives on.
In every servant who looks at a cruel master and thinks quietly, privately, that someone should do something. In every whispered conversation in corners where the powerful can't hear. In every careful mapping of routine and vulnerability, the conspiracy never really ends. It just changes form, adapts to new contexts, waits for the next moment when the powerless decide they've had enough.
The whispers in the hall will always be mapping something. The only question is whether that something stays harmless or becomes dangerous, whether the quiet voices stay quiet or find a reason to coordinate, whether the next cruel master will be smart enough to listen to his servants' whispers or foolish enough, like Edmund, to ignore them until it's too late.
That's the permanent change, the habit that persists long after Blackwood Hall's specific conspiracy ended. The awareness on both sides that whispers matter, that they carry meaning and potential and threat, that the quiet conversations in corners aren't always harmless, that sometimes they're mapping your death, and you won't know until it's already happened.
Edmund learned that lesson too late. Others learned it in time. The social order adjusted, adapted, tried to prevent future Blackwood Halls while preserving the hierarchy that makes them possible. It's an impossible balance, trying to maintain power structures based on inequality while preventing the inevitable resistance those inequalities generate.
The whispers continue. They always will. In manor houses and offices and anywhere else power concentrates and cruelty becomes routine. People with no formal power finding informal ways to resist, to coordinate, to map the territory of their aggression and identify its weak points.
Sometimes those whispers stay theoretical. Sometimes they become action. Sometimes they map murder and execute it perfectly and change habits and threats forever.
That's the story of Blackwood Hall. That's why whispers in the hall mapped a complot against the Lord and changed everything that came after. Not because murder is the answer, it rarely is, but because even the quietest voices, organized carefully enough, can become loud enough to kill.
The conspirators proved that. They paid for it in different ways, William with his life, the others with exile and guilt and the weight of carrying secrets forever. But they proved it, and that proof echoes through history, a whispered lesson about power and resistance, and the danger of underestimating the people you've made invisible.
Listen to the whispers. They're always saying more than you think they are. And sometimes, if you've been cruel enough, they're saying, "You're next."